During World War II, most armies tried very hard to look powerful. They had tanks, trucks, cannons, soldiers, and a lot of noise. But one American unit had a very unusual speciality. It could arrive in a field and suddenly make the enemy believe a whole army was there. The funny part was that many of its tanks were filled with air. Its battlefield weapons included inflatable vehicles, giant speakers, fake radio messages, costumes, and a surprising amount of acting. This was the Ghost Army, a real unit that fought by making the enemy believe in something that was not actually there. The Ghost Army was not a legend invented after the war. It was real. Officially, the unit was called the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. That name sounded serious and very military, but it did not capture how strange the job really was. These men were trained to become a moving illusion. Wherever they went, they pretended to be bigger than they were. A small group could pretend to be thousands of soldiers. A quiet road could become the road to a massive attack. A few trucks could become the sign of an entire armored division. In war, information can be as valuable as ammunition. If an enemy commander believes an attack is coming from the north, he may move troops north. If the real attack comes from the south, that mistake can change everything. The Allies understood this. They needed to hide real movements, protect soldiers, and make German intelligence chase the wrong clues. The Ghost Army was designed for that exact job. It did not need to defeat a tank in a direct fight. It needed to convince the enemy that a tank was somewhere else, making noise and causing worry. Many soldiers in the Ghost Army were not just ordinary recruits. Some were artists, designers, architects, illustrators, photographers, sound technicians, and actors. In civilian life, they might have painted posters, built stage sets, designed buildings, or worked in creative studios. In the army, those talents became useful in a completely different way. They understood how to create an image. They knew how props worked. They knew that a believable scene needed details. For them, deception was not random lying. It was design, timing, and performance under dangerous conditions. The most famous trick of the Ghost Army was the inflatable tank. From far away, it looked convincing. From the air, it could look like real armored equipment parked in formation. But up close, the truth was much sillier. The tank was made of rubber and canvas. It could be carried, unfolded, filled with air, and placed wherever the illusion needed it. A real tank was heavy, loud, and dangerous. A Ghost Army tank was light enough for a few men to move. It was basically a battlefield balloon with a very serious job. Of course, inflatable tanks came with one small problem. Real tanks do not usually try to escape in the wind. Rubber tanks sometimes did. If a strong breeze arrived at the wrong moment, the soldiers had to act fast. A fake tank sliding across a field would not exactly help the illusion. So the Ghost Army had to secure everything carefully. The job was serious, but there must have been moments when it looked absurd. Trained soldiers urgently wrestling with a tank that weighed less than the soldiers themselves. A fake tank alone was not enough. The Ghost Army had to build a whole story around it. They placed tents nearby. They parked trucks in believable patterns. They made tracks in the dirt so it looked as if heavy vehicles had been moving. They arranged equipment in ways that made sense from the air. They knew the enemy would not believe one random tank sitting in a field. But a tank with tents, tire marks, supply areas, and busy-looking soldiers became much more convincing. The Ghost Army did not only trick the eyes. It also tricked the ears. They used powerful speakers to play recorded sounds of military activity. These sounds included tank engines, trucks, men shouting orders, metal clanking, and units moving through the night. From a distance, it could sound like an entire force was arriving. The enemy might hear engines rumbling and imagine armored vehicles rolling into position. In reality, the noise might be coming from a few soldiers with speakers and a very dramatic audio playlist. Radio was another part of the illusion. German intelligence listened carefully to Allied radio traffic, hoping to learn where units were moving. The Ghost Army gave them something to hear. Their radio operators sent fake messages and copied the style of real units. They had to sound natural. They had to sound busy. They had to sound like the soldiers they were pretending to be. It was not just noise. It was acting through Morse code, radio rhythm, and military procedure. The enemy heard signals and believed a real unit was there. The soldiers also performed in public. Sometimes they wore patches from units they were pretending to represent. They drove vehicles with fake markings. They visited towns and behaved as if a large force was nearby. If spies or informants were listening, the Ghost Army wanted them to hear the right rumors. A soldier might complain loudly about all the tanks arriving soon. Another might act as if his unit was preparing for a big move. It was theatre, but the audience did not know it was watching a show. The magic of the Ghost Army came from combining many tricks at once. A scout might see tanks from far away. A plane might photograph a camp. Radio listeners might hear messages from a unit. At night, enemy soldiers might hear engines and movement. Informants might report that American troops were talking about a major operation. Each clue supported the others. One trick could be doubted, but many clues together created a story. And if the story felt real enough, enemy commanders had to react to it. Even though the story sounds funny, the work was dangerous. The Ghost Army often operated close to the front lines. If the Germans discovered the trick, the men could be attacked. They were not an armored division. Their most important weapons were props, speakers, and radios. That meant they had to be careful, fast, and convincing. The comedy of inflatable tanks existed beside real risk. These soldiers were not playing a harmless prank. They were using deception to protect real troops and influence real battles. One of the Ghost Army's important missions came near the Rhine River in 1945. The Allies needed to cross into Germany, and the Rhine was a major barrier. The real crossing had to be protected. The Ghost Army helped create the impression that a large American force was preparing in one area, while real operations were happening elsewhere. They used fake equipment, sound effects, radio traffic, and visible movement. The goal was simple: make German forces look in the wrong direction at the worst possible time. The purpose of all this was not just to be clever. It was to save lives. If German units moved toward the fake threat, they were not waiting at the real attack point. If enemy commanders became uncertain, Allied soldiers gained time and space. The Ghost Army showed that deception could reduce danger for real troops. Their best victory was not a destroyed bridge or a captured town. Their best victory was a German decision made in the wrong direction, because a rubber tank, a speaker, and a fake radio message had done their job. After the war, the Ghost Army did not immediately become famous. Its missions stayed secret for many years. Many of the men returned to normal life. Some went back to art, design, advertising, architecture, and other creative work. They carried an unusual memory. During the war, their creativity had become a military tool. For a long time, most people did not know what they had done. History remembered many famous battles, but the soldiers who built fake armies remained mostly hidden, almost like ghosts again. The Ghost Army proved something surprising. Creativity can be powerful. A good drawing, a convincing prop, a realistic sound effect, and a believable performance can change what an enemy thinks is happening. Their story is not just about fake tanks. It is about imagination used under pressure. It is about artists and technicians solving problems in a way that generals could use. They did not replace the soldiers on the front lines, but they helped protect them. The Ghost Army made the battlefield into a stage, and the enemy became the audience. Today, the Ghost Army still feels fascinating because it mixes history with something almost cartoonish. Inflatable tanks sound like a joke until someone realizes they helped protect real soldiers. Giant speakers playing fake army noises sound silly until they make enemy commanders nervous. Soldiers gossiping on purpose in cafes sounds like comedy until it becomes intelligence warfare. The story works because it is both funny and serious. It reminds people that clever ideas can matter as much as heavy equipment. So the next time someone says pretending is useless, the Ghost Army would probably disagree. During World War II, these men pretended to be an army. They pretended to have tanks. They pretended to move thousands of troops. They created sounds, signals, rumors, and scenes that made the enemy believe something false. And by doing that, they helped real soldiers survive. The Ghost Army did not win the war alone, but it added one of the most unusual chapters to it. Sometimes victory comes from strength. Sometimes it comes from courage. And sometimes it comes from a rubber tank that looks real from far away.